Hello Voices, my name is Joe Troy and I'm a multi-award winning voice actor, audio producer and host of VOICEOVER'S audio adventure podcast, a bi-weekly show where I learn about the voiceover and audio industry and share with you all of the stories, tips and tricks along the way. Hello and welcome to another adventure. Today, we are going to be catching up with a friend of the pod and getting some updates and news on a topic that a lot of you may or may not be familiar with. AI. Now, I briefly touched upon this topic in previous episodes, and my God, is it a minefield. There's so much to go through, consider, and be aware of that I just can't keep up or even be bothered with. That's why I always like to get experts in to tell us more. Today's guest is Dr. Mathilde Pavis, who you may have seen out and about fighting for our rights against the AI overlords. For those of you who may not be familiar with her, Dr. Mathilde Pavis is an expert on the legal protection of people's face, voice, and body in digital media. Her research focuses on deepfakes and performance cloning, and their regulation through laws and contracts. I wanted to get an update on what's been going on since we last spoke over a year ago and see if things in the wild west of AI have calmed down. Let's go. Well, hello and welcome back to the pod. You're an old friend. How have you been? How's things been going for you?
Hello. Thanks for having me back. Things have been very good. You're joining me in my new office. So my small business has grown and expanded enough to warrant a move.
Very glam. So I see you were on TV at one point. I don't know when that was, but I know you were on Channel 4 at one point. Do you tell people more about that, what that was in aid of?
Sure. So there were a few reasons to come on. I think the first time I joined on in the context of a voiceover dispute against IBM at the time. Craig Marston, his voice had been used by IBM in what he argues would be outside the scope of his contract. So we went on to, we talked about that and the impact of AI on artists like voiceovers. And that feels like a long time ago now.
Yeah.
And then since then, governments have started to look at AI and thinking about regulating. So I went on to talk about that, what's a realistic prospect, and whether different countries would agree on similar solutions or not, especially when there's huge conflict, like with Russia and the war in Ukraine and things like that. Would we agree on AI? And more recently, which also is still a few months ago, was about to talk about the launch of the tool Sora, which is the video generator that OpenAI has recently launched, but has only given access to a few people until it works out all of the legal and ethical issues that are involved. So, yeah, a range of topics.
Very busy. You're like a star now. I'm very privileged to be speaking to you.
Not at all.
You're doing amazing work. I must say, like, it's something that we should all pay more attention to. I'm going to be honest, and there are a lot of people that aren't paying attention to it. And, there are amazing people like yourselves working behind the scenes, making sure that we are protected. So it's good that we have these dialogues, and that's why I wanted you back on the pod. Since we spoke last time, when did we speak actually? Was it a year or two? I can't remember.
It's been at least a year. Was
maybe
a year and a half, I think.
Yeah, a year and a half. Time has flown. Yeah, and we've both been on our own journeys, and I'm sure there's a lot more to talk about. So that's why you're back here today. You sent me a couple stories actually that I wanted to talk more about in detail, and of course some other things to do with AI. So let's jump into it. So the first one you sent me was about Google basically saying that UK risks being left behind in the AI race without more data centers. Now, what is that?
That's a great question. So what's happening at the moment is that large AI companies, the drivers of AI development at the moment, so Microsoft and Google really, but Meta's really soon after that, is naming and shaming the UK government for being behind on the AI innovation curve. And they're saying, look, if you don't want to lose the economic and the AI battle, and if you want to be the leading country in the world, you need to invest in AI and in the infrastructures that enable AI innovation. So people think of AI as like this kind of digital tool, like this software that only runs on computers. But the reality is that it has a really like physical presence and impact, I might add cost, in the physical world. So in order for those computers to run, they need two things. They need algorithm software, essentially, mathematical formulas trained, and they also need a lot of data. And you know that because some of that data is actually the stuff you produce and you create as artists. And that things need to be stored on servers in order to be used, prompted, trained. And so you need basically warehouses for both software and data. And that has a physical presence that literally are massive buildings like factories that host supercomputers in them that can churn the data, host it, and being basically accessible on demand. Whenever you use it and you prompt ChatGPT, it basically is server based. So your request goes into a cloud that churns a bunch of data and algorithm together to give you an answer. Prompting ChatGPT uses 10 times more energy than doing a Google search. And if you generate an image with another tool, for example, with a Midjourney or Stable Diffusion or others, that uses the energy cost of charging your smartphone like from 0 to 100. So it just gives you so that stuff takes physical space. So what Google is saying to the UK government is like, build those buildings where we could put our servers and store our data and our computing power if you don't want to fall behind, because we need that close to the user in order for the user to engage with AI. Second, it's also saying, can you loosen the regulation around data mining? Can we go and train our tech on your content in the UK without having to ask for consent and permission, at least at the training phase? And the UK not being part of the EU at the moment, legally, you need to ask the creator, the rights holder, for permission before you use it for training, like mining and training for commercial purposes. And the government is like, oh, we don't want to fall behind. So should we contemplate loosening the rights? And this is where we go into now what feels like a well-known dance between the tech industry asking to loosen the regulatory frameworks and the creative industry saying, hang on, this is our workers' pay. This is how we finance and sustain our business models, our economy, entertainment, education, lots of things. So can we think about that before we open the floodgates?
So would you say it's more of a stalemate at the moment? Because I would assume that Google can basically do what they want in the EU right now with the regulations. Is that correct?
Well, for data mining, EU laws has created a really broad framework where if it's for non-commercial purposes, so that excludes Google, you can mine without asking for permission. It's the same in the UK. But in the EU, you can also mine for commercial purposes, so comes in Google, Meta, etc. They can mine on content that is created by EU artists and rights holders, unless those people have said no, have opted out. So the baseline is consent until you say, no, I don't want my content to be mined upon. And it basically puts the burden on the rights holder, on you, to know about this rule, to know about these rights, and to communicate and put in place, like, how do I say no? Where do I say no? So you need to embed that no within the metadata of your file before you share it. So that, it's a lot to ask.
That leads on actually to the second story you sent me, where, repeating what you said, all of your data is being mined and you have to physically say, no, I do not want to, which the majority of people don't do anyway. So ultimately, me and you are being mined right now. But
absolutely,
what are they mining and how are they using this data? Because, for example, if I type into ChatGPT, how do I write a cover letter versus what we're talking about right now? Two completely different pieces of information and data, but ultimately they're being used. How and why are they being mined?
So maybe we should start with how we mine. So the most common form and technique of mining is essentially using a bot. Sometimes we call them a crawling bot, which is a little piece of software that's instructed to go and visit online pages. So those without passwords, without login or paywall or any friction of that kind in a way. Go in mind. So personal websites, professional websites, most social media platforms, right? They're just freely, browsable and engageable. And so those little bots basically function like digital hoovers. They go onto your site and they've been instructed to pick up information. So whether it's text or images, both, sometimes videos, and they're in that process often make a copy of whatever they encounter. And then that copy then is sent back to the person who's instructed the bot. And then they just compile that information into what we call a data set. They clean up, they structure it so that the next phase, so that content is readable for a computer. So it's machine readable. And that takes a lot of time, a lot of human labor actually in the cleaning up. Now, there's a lot we don't know, because it's only the people who instruct the bot and harvest that data that know what the purpose of the use is for. Sometimes in the instruction, in the encoding of the bot, the person will say, hey, I'm agent of OpenAI, or I'm Claude, I'm the bot for Claude, and I'm calling your data. And that's helpful for the site owner, because if you go onto the back end of your website, you could see who's visited your site. Not, for example, social media platforms, the visibility of that information is a little bit more complicated to access, but you could see who's come, who's picked up what, and then who's left with what in the meantime. But some bots don't have that information. They're not associated or recognized or claimed by any company. So you don't really know who's coming to visit and mine you, essentially. For sure, our faces have been mined. If you've posted anything of you online, or your employer does, or has your client has, you've been mined for sure. So now, what we're starting to understand now is that those bots have mined easier access platforms. So a lot of factual content like biographies, news, anything that's available online at social media platforms has been mined first. What's a little bit harder to mine but still possible is fiction content, because often that is, in a physical books behind a paywall, or in a digital copy, music, but behind accounts, and you need to log in, etc., which is way harder for a bot to access and often impossible. And why it's useful depends on who then buys that data that's been aggregated. And this is where we lost all track and provenance and information and transparency. And the EU regulators and other countries are calling for that transparency. Can we know what you've mined and then what you've subsequently used and for what purpose, so that people can enforce and exercise their rights? And by people, especially in the creative industries, whether it's the producer, the publisher, the individual creator, their unions, like that information is essential. A recent study called Consent in Crisis, written just a few months ago, is really interesting because it shows that the content that's been mined and the content that is then being generated is completely misaligned. So in a study about ChatGPT, about the very little bit of information the company has allowed and has given researchers and allowed researchers to explore, they've realized, okay, the bot ChatGPT most of the time the majority of content it's mined has been factual, fact-based, like news, weather forecasts, social media, chats about what you're doing today, etc. But the most common generated outcome in content is about fiction or creative writing. And this is why we're seeing that the quality is not as good, because the content you're mining is like misaligned with the content that people are asking and prompting and playing with, which calls for like the next generation of AI tools will likely do better if the content mine matches the content that is, being prompted and generated on the other end. And this is where I'm hoping we'll see more AI for the creative industries, by the creative industries, where like big producers, publishers, contents put all of their portfolio in one basket, make a licensing agreement with an AI company in order to generate and help create a tool that works for creatives, as opposed to mine the world's data, whatever's available, Reddit and New York Times without distinction, and then be available for the mass market, regardless of the type of quality you're trying to get out of.
So since we spoke last time, we've now got a new party in power in the UK. Mm-hmm. What is it looking like they're going to do in terms of protecting creatives and AI?
So if we remind ourselves what the previous government did was to have a pro-innovation approach to AI, which meant light touch regulation, and considered loosening legal protection to artists in order to encourage AI innovation. So not the most pro-creative industries approach. And that effectively, their strategies and their plan for reform got slowed down or halted by the lobby, like artists unions and artist representatives and publishers came out and said, look, like we can't go ahead without more evidence, more study, like thinking about this. So that got paused. And basically what happened is then the conservative government kind of kicked the tin further down the track, waiting for a change of government or re-election to then put in place a new, program of work. Now Labour comes in, and this is why Google comes leaning and shaming a bit, saying, hey, you don't want to fall behind, you don't want to be that one, saying, okay, what are you going to do? So far, we don't have an official position on AI. What we're hearing are rumors and kind of reports by anonymous sources to the press saying that we will have a consultation soon. We are looking to support and buttress artists' rights to avoid the erosion of copyright and the erosion of remuneration for artists. But we've not heard like the nuts and bolts that would come with that. What's their plan? What's their thinking? We're also hearing that maybe the Keir Starmer government is considering an opt-out regime like the EU, which obviously rights holders are not very receptive to for the reasons we've just discussed. At the same time, recently Keir Starmer declared in the press or in the letter that was then published that he believes that any publishers and rights holders whose content has been used to train AI should be remunerated for that, which is, positive signals, I think, in the right direction. But until we have that flesh on the bones, it's hard to assess what the government's going to do. It would be good to hear soon because obviously AI technology is not waiting for us to decide.
Yeah.
I'm not saying rush to a solution, but I'm saying rush to start the conversation.
But that's the thing, is are we not losing the race in terms of like it's happening as we speak, but nothing's being done. So, you touched upon this where what have you used and why have you used it? That we're going to be at that point all the time, and it's almost impossible to find out what has been taken and what has been used and where it's been used. So how high is it on the docket for them to actually look at?
I mean, I hope high. I think what we need is also a bit of a narrative shift, like different stories, because we often think of, what can AI do to artists, like to help them do their work and to the creative industries, etc., forgetting that actually artists and the creative industries do a lot for AI. So it's not just how can AI help the arts and creativity, and how are the creative industries already helping AI by being the main producer of one key resource, which is that data. Human generated content, also known as training data, which are basically artistic works, cultural works, performances, poems, etc., etc. All of that is essential for AI innovation. And somehow we forget that comes from the creative industries and that they should have a seat at the table here. They're not just the fun area to have AI run loose because it's entertainment, it's culture, it's harmless. I think this is currently missing from current conversations. What gives me hope in that is that we're seeing a second wave of AI tools that are what we sometimes nickname like clean models. So AI tools and AI models that have been trained on entirely licensed content or close, that therefore presents at a higher price point, but with a higher quality output, plus more ethical training on the back end, where the artist whose work has been used to create the tech I've been asked and or remunerated. And that gives me hope because it shows that it's technically possible and there's a business model that can do better than just doing wild training online without considering the rights or consent or opinions of people who've put out and shared that content for completely different reason than enriching Silicon Valley. Most of the time you don't create with that purpose in mind, I don't think. So I'm hoping that the government will really put their weight and support behind that second wave of AI tools, where it's AI tools developed with values important to the creative industries like authenticity, rights protection, remuneration, consent, context, high quality, low bias, accuracy, because 80% good, in the output generated by AI is not good enough for a journalist. Like they need 100% good. So we need tech to perform that well if we're going to roll it out to so many aspects of our lives. So let's see. I'd be really interested to see a strategy that supports those type of operators who will be in the position of a David against Goliath, if you think of how small the startups are relative to an OpenAI, a Google, a Meta. They're pretty big players in the market.
Are you hopeful that things will turn out okay, or are you still on the fence?
I'm a realist optimist, so I'm on the fence with hope. I think Labour is, making noise that is more supportive and sympathetic to the position of the creative industries than the previous government. At the moment, I work a lot with the United Nations, and in particular UNESCO, because they're the one looking after culture and artist rights, and they're very sympathetic to the position and the cause of the creative industries and all of the freelancers and individual workers that are in there. And I think there is international consensus on that we need to do better. The question is how we do that. And I don't want the burden of this system that we're going to come up with to fall on the individual artist who frankly has better things to do than being an expert in law and in metadata in relation to their data not to be exploited, if that makes sense. Because then I turn you into a lawyer, which is not the point of your job. And this is not we have you on this earth. Well, exactly. And I want to say it's not for everyone. Like, it's not for everyone to be a voiceover or to be an illustrator. And we need to keep that diversity. I think, hopefully we'll come up with those solutions. I hope we are in the Wild West phase of AI, and the technology will mature, the market as well, and the regulatory regime, but soon, because I think your industry in particular is really taking the first punch. And I would hate to see the profession wiped out or shrunk so significantly that, the next generation can't enter the market, or you can't sustain a career.
I've heard from a few friends of mine that I would say the bigger jobs are still okay, because just because it's easier to direct a person, it's easier to get emotion from a person, it's easier to produce a person than, getting an AI to read the Bible, for example. That can be done. There's no emotion in that, it's just done. And that goes back to the quality of the data mining that you're getting, because we see them everywhere, people being thrown like £100. Oh, can you come and do this data, not data mining, but can you train a AI? I will give you £100, but you have to read like 20-30 pages of text or stuff like that. We all see them everywhere, LinkedIn, wherever. And obviously with that, the quality is not going to be high, because if this is your job, why am I then going to turn around and do £100 job that is ultimately going to take my job? So you're getting bad quality. So I think for now, and even when we spoke previously, I'm not too concerned yet. I actually believe that the fields such as drawing, editing, I think those kind of fields would be hit first, because I can edit now. I'm not trained on editing, but I can edit something. Whereas, years ago you couldn't do that. You had to learn the craft, you had to do that. I'm by no means an expert, but I can do a job. And I think the industries where you need to produce something physical, they're the ones that are going to be hit first. That's my opinion anyway. So that leads on to my next question, which is, how do we protect ourselves now? Has it changed, or is it still the same? Writing disclaimers, is that even worth it anymore? Is that really protecting you?
Because we've not had a change of regulation and no major change in technology, the same applies to read your contract and make sure that you're not giving permission without realizing to the content that you're creating or co-creating being used and repurposed for mining purposes. In certain AI clause to that effect, if the contract doesn't say that, I think they're easier to insert now, because the wider industry is more aware of the concerns and of the need for those clauses. I think opt out, make a list of every digital account, online platforms, tools that you use, and look and go in and opt out. You have to do it manually, which is really annoying. I'm not yet aware of a service that can do it all in one for you. But otherwise, you have to. Exactly. You need a little AI agent, your
Yeah.
agent lawyer, doing that on your behalf. Because what happens is that, and people are not aware, it's not just a contract you have with a client or an engager where there could be a permission to use your content for AI training purposes or cloning purposes, although the latter are rarer, is that when we basically upload content online, whether it's social media to share or onto editing software platform, if you look at the terms and conditions, often there's a clause that says you give me a license, non-exclusive and all that, but with that I can share whatever you upload with my commercial partners for any purposes in perpetuity, blah blah blah. And those clauses have been used to justify training, even though it's not expressly mentioned. Sometimes it's expressly mentioned. And in any case, most companies have to give you an opt-out because of what the regulations the EUs have introduced. But that means often you need to find your way to those mechanisms that usually at the bottom of their website or somewhere on your account. It's a bit tedious. Once you've done it once, you shouldn't have to go back and do it again. It's something you can do. The other thing is to insert I don't want you to train on me or robotext or little metadata tags in every digital file that you produce before you post them online. Again, very tedious and manual and boring, but maybe it's our call out to your tech friends to come up with a better solution and see.
These people know what they're doing, man. They know that we don't read contracts like that. That's why they put them in there.
I know. I mean, the other option, and I'm mindful of my wonderful podcast co-hosts Marcus Hutton and Annette Rizzo, who will say, write to your MP, get them to advocate for your rights on your behalf. It's one letter, and that could impact in terms of change in a greater way than, individual efforts.
Well, before I let you go, can you tell us more about your podcast and the great work that you're doing?
Oh, yes, I will plug away. So I've joined you on the journey of the podcast. I am a co-host on the podcast called The Last Human Voice. And what we do is we basically have chats with artists, lawyers, AI developers, regulators, anyone who has an interesting take or interesting information or insights on AI in the creative industries. My co-hosts are Marcus Hutton and Annette Rizzo, who are very well experienced and voiceovers, exactly. So we do have a strong flavor on voiceovers, and we do raise the profile of performers, in particular voiceovers, a lot, because I think there are the group that's first affected by this change of technology. And what we're trying to do is to make those discussions as open and as accessible as possible, in order for more than just the tech industry to be able to contribute to this conversation. And what's great is that we now know that we're listened to by officials in governments and UNESCO and people who can make change. They just sometimes don't have the information from the ground. And we're trying to bring that information up. So if you have questions or recommendations, send them to us, because we'll happily raise whatever problem you have on the podcast. But tell me, before I go, tell me about you. How do you feel about generating a little AI Joe Troy? Have you changed your mind? Have you gone from cool to warm, from warm to cool? What's happened?
I'm going to say...
Oh, you've done it. Have you done it already?
No. I'm going to say I'm still not comfortable, only because I don't need one. And also because there's no clear laws out there of how it will be used now or in the future. I would use one if there was a black and white of, you can have a copy of me and I can get that to do the low ball jobs. Fine, I'll get that. But now, no. That's not to say I don't use AI on a regular basis. Of course I do. We all do.
Most of us.
But yeah, in terms of my VO job, no. I'm still not. Nah.
So if you had a clone, you'd want to have complete control over it.
Complete control. Or have somebody that I trust being in control of it. But to be honest, I don't think any VO really needs a clone of themselves. I don't, because nobody's working to that volume to be needing one. Even if you've done audio books, it's like, why? It just doesn't work. I think for the artist, it doesn't work. It's more for the client. And they would probably want, about 20 voices on their roster, just that they can use as and when they need, not for me say you can use my voice because you need, like, you know what I mean? It's just a bit difficult, but yeah. I'm maybe next year ask me this question. I'll change it, but
we'll revisit.
But that's the thing. I think the
understand.
education needs to be there. I think it just, the work that you're doing and your podcast is making it more accessible and palatable for the average Joe. See what I did there? So I think
the hope.
There needs to be more education out there and resources that people can use and easy to understand. And I think that's the beginning of anything when something new gets introduced, the education side.
Yeah. And in terms of education, I think like representative organizations, unions for voiceovers in the UK, Equity is a great place for resources. I'm also mindful that there's also NAVA and the United Voice Artists, UVA. Their associations have been very active in terms of representing VO interest and also putting out resources on that you can use in your day-to-day, hopefully.
I love that you interview me at the end. Look at you.
Turn it around.
It's been a pleasure to speak to you again, and congratulations on everything you've achieved, and I'm sure you're going to do a lot more next year, and hopefully, fingers crossed, this whole AI thing will be a bit more clearer next year. So
likewise. It's always thank you. It's always a pleasure to hear your voice come on when I turn on the radio and I'm like, that's Joe on that advert. I'm like,
well,
go
hopefully
Joe.
you'll keep hearing me and not an AI version of me.
Exactly.
Awesome. All right then. Well, take care and we'll speak again soon.
You too. Bye, Joe.
Now, what did I learn from today's conversation? It looks like there's still no jurisdiction on our rights as creators when it comes to AI. But that being said, there is dialogue happening as we speak, and it's only a matter of time before we hear something on the horizon. There are always ways to protect ourselves. First is education. Join unions, contact and follow content created by people like Dr. Mathilde Pavis, and remember to always spread the word. And finally, read the fine print. Read contracts thoroughly. Don't sign anything you don't understand and always ask questions. The sad thing is you don't, me included. But if there's going to be any change, we need to take accountability and start close to home with us. Thank you, Dr. Mathilde Pavis, for joining me again. If you want to find out more, as always, there's a link below. I hope you enjoyed the episode today because I've learned something today. Stop being lazy. Okay, everyone, it's time for me to sign off. I wish you a great day. Until next time, bye-bye.